Noswaith dda, good evening. Rydych chi'n fyw heno yn ymuno ni ag webinar Rheoli ariannol a llywodraethu mewn cynghorau lleol. Hello, good evening and welcome. You're joining us live in Cardiff for the Financial Management and the Governance in Local Councils webinar. Hello, how are we all in the four corners of Wales? At the last count, I believe there was about 150 people who had registered, and there's an average of 2 people per link. So it's safe to say there's about 300 people listening in. So, enw fi yw Una Lloyd, my name's Una Lloyd. I'm part of the Good Practice team, rwy'n rhan o'r tîm ymarfer da, ond yn bwysig iawn, just tu ôl y camera. Noswaith dda, Beth? Noswaith dda, Dyf? Shwd i chi? Chi'n iawn? So Dyfrig and Beth are just behind the camera. They're the important people taking your questions. We're part of the webinar, and so are you. So how do you get in touch with us this evening? 2 ways of getting in touch. First way is their email address. That's good.practice@audit.wales. Also, we have a hashtag. If you Twitter, we've got a tweet. If you go against the hashtag of WAO FinGov, short for financial government, we're trying to keep it as short as possible. You can do it that way. Or a few of you who've been doing tests this evening and over the last couple of weeks to make sure that your Wi-Fi is working. If you've got a Google account, you can contribute via the chat. I know some of you have been doing that over the last couple of weeks. So let's have a feel about who's listening in tonight then. I've highlighted a few of you. Please don't be offended if you're not one of the ones I'm saying hello to. Hello, Cwm Cadnant, Nevin, Community Council, Caerwent, Pontardawe, Old St Mellons, Felin Fach, Bay of Colwyn, Castle, Gresford, Cyngor Cymuned Llangri, Noswaith dda i chi dron gwbl, hefyd lan yn y gogledd, mae Llandegfa, Llanasa, Menarth lawr yn y de. So, a very warm welcome to you. So let me just repeat in terms of how you can get in touch with us just once more before I introduce the panel. So, I'm going to ask the panel 3 questions which you already had via the actual joining instructions. Once I've the panel have given their responses, you can email at any time to good.practice@audit.wales. If you tweet, make sure you put the hashtag on the tweet, WAO FinGov, and our Good Practice Twitter account is WAO Good Practice. Thank the Lord that Dyfrig sitting behind. So that's, Dyfrig, can I just double check that with you?
At Good Practice WAO.
At Good Practice WAO. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to the panel, if I may. So sitting to my left, good evening.
Good
Hello.
evening.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. I can't see you up there. They're all over Wales, I know that. But if I could see you, I'd be looking at you, but I'll look at the camera instead. But my name's Paul League, and I'm Deputy Chief Executive Officer of One Voice Wales.
Paul, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hi there. I'm Anthony Barrett. I'm Assistant Auditor General at the Wales Audit Office, and I have responsibility for all of our financial audit work, including that for community and town councils.
Anthony, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. Yeah. Last but not least, hello.
Hello, Ina.
Right.
Thank you for saying that, last but not least. My name is Mark Llywodraethu. I'm the Wales Policy Liaison Officer representing the Society of Local Clerks tonight. I also serve as clerk to Llanelli Rural Community Council.
So, this webinar has actually been recorded. It'll be going live on our YouTube account in about 20 minutes after the end of the webinar. Also, we'll be putting up the bilingual translations on it as well, so you can listen to it. So, not listen to it, there'll be messages across the bottom in Welsh. It'll be completely bilingual. So, before I actually start asking the panel questions, the 3 questions that we posed them, I think it would be helpful. Anthony, do you want to give a little bit of context as to why we're holding this webinar tonight, just to sort of give the confines, if you like?
Yeah, I think it's important that everyone who works in community councils and involved with community councils understands the important role they play in their community. And one of the ways in which it's established is by maintaining proper stewardship of the public funds and being able to demonstrate that. And through our audit work over the years, we've seen improving standards in community councils, but there are still a large proportion of community councils who are not meeting the basic standards in terms of demonstrating some of that governance. We've produced our annual report recently, which covers some of that, and this is a useful tool using the webinar to try and reinforce some of those messages.
Okay, that's lovely, thank you. So I'm going to kick off now and ask the first of the 3 questions to the panel. Feel free to post us any questions anytime you like. We've had a load of questions in already from people who are unable to listen live, but they'll pick it up following the webinar. So I kind of need to manage your expectations a little bit, if that's okay. Because we've got the sheer volume of questions coming in, some questions we won't be able to answer live through this webinar, but we will answer your questions. We'll blog about it. We'll be interviewing the panel afterwards, and over the series of the next few weeks, we'll be getting the panel's response to your questions. So bear with us, but we will make sure all your responses will be captured in one way or another, either live tonight or via blog. So without further ado, Paul, are you happy for me to come to you first on the first question? So the first question I'm going to pose to the panel is, why is budget setting so important? Pretty key question to kick off with, I think, Paul.
Yeah. Well, I think many councils have come to me over the last 6 months about the issue about budgets, because this was one of the areas tested by the external auditors. And I know some councils who actually believe they set budgets didn't necessarily minute the fact, so there was no record of the budget consideration. But the fact is, whether you have one or not, you should do, and in fact have to, under Section 50 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992. So it's not an option, it's actually a statutory requirement. So you need to do it. Now, I know some councils are very small. I know one, and there could be one small on this, that has a £3,000 annual budget. Well, okay, your budget may well be just a few lines on a small spreadsheet. Other councils, much larger ones, it would be more complicated. But you need the budget because it justifies the precept and the budget setting which the council will agree to for the following year. Now, part of the budget making process is not just about looking at income and expenditure for the coming year, it's also doing an assessment of reserves and also provisions that you might need in future years. And sometimes councils make a decision to use some of the unearmarked reserves to reduce the precept requirement. That's sometimes the case. I'm aware of some councils that do that. But bear in mind, if you do that, it's still important that you keep an earmarked reserve. Minimum normally we would see as 3 months to a maximum of 12 months. But don't forget, councils can reduce the reserve as a means of reducing the precept requirement. But the guidance is don't reduce that for less than 3 months. Now, producing a budget, what does it do? It actually demonstrates accountability and transparency on the part of your council. And after all, the elected representatives are there to represent the people in their town or community, and they should really want to demonstrate that accountability and transparency. And I would say it's also a cornerstone of financial planning, because it explains how a council is planning to deliver its aims and policies for the year ahead, and in fact, I think the summary would be as a record of its spending plans.
Well, thank you, thanks very much for that. Mark, are you happy for me to come to you just for you to share your thoughts now, if that's okay? Yeah?
Yes, thank you, Ina. Paul's given a very in-depth explanation there. And the only thing an excellent way of getting that authorisation in advance. Once set and approved by the council, it gives the council real authority to act. Okay. So that's what I'd like to add.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Before I hand over to Anthony, a couple of people have emailed us in and saying, they're sort of not sure whether they want to be asking questions or not. Can I just say, I can guarantee on anonymity. If you want to ask a question or you're thinking you've got a question, there's going to be lots of other people in exactly the same position. So I'm not going to say that John Jones from Ceredigion has asked this question. I'll just pose the question. Of all the questions we've had so far, we've themed them together already anyway, so we couldn't attribute it to anybody in particular in many ways. So feel free to email in It's about your question. That's the most important. Take this opportunity. So Anthony, can I come to you now just to sort of round up part one, if I may?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my two colleagues have very ably set out why budget setting is important. A, it's the law, B, it sets the standard and the spending plans, etc. And as Paul said, it needs to be proportionate. One wouldn't expect a very small council to have a very complex budget, very complex spreadsheets, etc. It will be relatively straightforward, but it needs to be presented to members and to be approved to, in effect, then authorise the expenditure that takes place after that.
Thank you. I like some of the comments that people have been sharing with us on Google about that they're having tea and cake around there. I'm very sorry, gentlemen, I haven't provided cake tonight. I do apologise about that. I learned that lesson. Thank you. I hope it's nice cake, by the way. What kind of cake have you got? So we've got quite a lot of questions already coming in. We've got a lot of questions on software and payroll. So we've tried to group them together on this one. So I'm just going to have a look at this one. Where are we here? So in terms of software and payroll, do we have any strong views here, gentlemen, about what comments about sort of what kind of software, what payroll should we be using? I'm going to come to Anthony first, if that's all right on that.
Yeah, I think for most councils, using something like Excel will be good enough. I mean, I'm aware that they're concerned about formula in some of the cells might be wrong and whatever. That's a question of just having good discipline around using spreadsheets. I think there are any number of commercial packages out there that people could use, whether it's for income expenditure or payroll. There's none in particular I would endorse, but what I would say is you just need to make sure that you're getting value for money. If you've got a very small council with one employee on the payroll, you're not going to need a very sophisticated system. You can have it if you want to, but is that giving you good value for money?
Okay, thank you. Paul, any comments you want to make?
Well, I think just to add one, I think similar view as Anthony, I can't recommend any packages. If member councils want to email me to find out what companies have bespoke packages, certainly I can respond to that. But as far as payroll is concerned, for those councils, I think it's with possibly less than 6 employees, might be 8 actually, but I think it's 6. You can use the product available from HMRC, which is PayTools RTI. It's good enough to do the job. All you need to add to that is to find somewhere in which you can produce pay slips for the staff. Other than that, I think that's something that's worth looking at because it's free of charge.
Okay. Thanks, Paul, for that. I'm just signaling to Beth and to Dove to pick up that link. We'll make sure any references to any resources that are made tonight, we will be sharing with you afterwards. So I can imagine quite a few are scribbling this information down. Rest assured, we are capturing that. Do you want to give us the headline? What was it called? HMRC? HMRC's
Basic Pay Tools, RTI, free downloadable from HMRC.
Okay. We'll make a note of that link and we'll come back and we'll send that to you at the very end if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying as well that if anyone out there is using a package and they're finding it, particularly good to use, etc., by all means send us through the details, and we can, without endorsing it, we can let people know what's being used.
Okay. So as Anthony's saying, please email us good.practice@audit.wales. There's a couple coming through there. Beth's give me a nod. There's a couple coming through. We might be able to share those with you afterwards. Thank you.
What I was saying, pretty much to add to what Paul and Anthony have already said, without giving particular endorsement to any commercial provider, and if I may, as a way of a plug, for the Clark magazine, which hopefully our members will have received, there are many companies in there advertising their wares, and feel free to look at the adverts and contact those companies to see what they can offer you.
Lovely, that's great, thank you. Okay, right. I hope you're sitting comfortably. I've got a rather long question I'm going to pose to the panel, but we're going to take it slightly wider because there's some issues we need to cover sort of that's slightly wider than this. So in terms of the first question 4, Jens, just let you know. So, in anticipation of potential structural changes in local councils, particularly in the context of mergers or other statutory combinations, what advice would the panel give to local councils wishing to maintain and protect their existing general reserves and safeguard their futures use to the existing local area boundary only? Paul, I think I'm going to come to you first on this one, if that's okay.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a relevant question, but it might be a premature one to consider at this stage. I think everyone has read, probably, who's watching the webinar, that the Welsh Government has produced this latest white paper on reforming local government, and in there it refers to a root and branch review of the sector to find out actually how the sector is organised, how it operates. And for anyone that's worked in the sector for a long time, I think we all know it operates so differently in all parts of Wales. So that root and branch review will take place, I'm not sure when, but the outcome of that would probably not impact on the sector until at least 5 years' time. So I think my other colleagues might want to add something to that. So I think maybe a bit premature to be too worried about that at this stage.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Beth, can we make a link for the white paper, just in case anyone's not aware of that white paper? Mark, can I come to you next, if that's all right, before I come to you, Anthony? Is that all right? Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. Yes, well, Paul has adequately covered the point about Welsh Government consulting with its public service reform agenda and what might be in store for township councils going forward. One point I'd like to pick up on, and that's to do with protection of general reserves. What I would encourage councils to do is look at the level of general reserves and determine then, whether indeed some money needs to be cycled off into earmarked reserves for particular projects. That way, whatever the future holds, you can then be sure that that money will be earmarked for a particular project. So, for example, if there was structural reform in the future, then those spending plans will be taken forward by the new entity. So that's what I'd like to add to that. Thank you, Ina.
Thank you. Yeah, well, great. And so I was thinking about the Wellbeing of the Future Generations Act as well. Any implications, do you think?
I think in terms of, there are certain responsibilities placed on town community councils in the Act, although they're not one of the named bodies in there. And I think it's important that any organisation takes a slightly longer term view of these things, rather than, an annual cycle. I know we have annual budgets and we have, 5-year democratic cycles, but we do need to look beyond there to see what's being provided. And I know from my own experience with community councils that they are often, what they do is very visible in the local community, and sometimes what the county councils, the unitaries do is a little bit taken for granted, but it's very visible what community councils do. So I think it's important that they take a longer view, and it's absolutely right to say look at earmarking, etc. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that actually, if there is to be a merger sometime down the line, then the new council will be responsible for those reserves and those earmarked reserves, and they may well have different priorities. Yeah. So in terms of asking the question, what can be done to protect, and I'm paraphrasing here, but local reserves for local people, there isn't much you can do once the new council's up and running, other than to seek to influence as members of that council how you want that money to be spent.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've had quite a lot of questions talking about sort of the monthly report. So we've chosen one particular question that kind of captures all of that. So the question is a monthly report that includes an ongoing bank reconciliation figure attached with the minutes to the councillors outlining the income and expenditure sufficient to comply with the so-called monitoring process? Now, lots of people have talked about the monitoring process. Mark, I'm going to come to you first on this one, because I think it's kind of your bag, really, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't know my bag. Certainly, I think, the way the question's posed there, it puts forward a very sort of comprehensive approach to how you should be reporting regularly to your councils on your income and expenditure. The one thing I would add to that, in terms of the detail that comes through, any good system will ensure that it shows the planned spending against actual spending, and that then makes it more meaningful for members to digest during the meetings, and of course adds to the scrutiny then of the whole overall process.
Key point there, thank you, well presented. There is an addendum to this question, which I'm going to pose to Paul, if that's all right. Is this then signed by the chairperson? Very interesting question, because for us, when we took that, we could take that a number of different ways, couldn't we, Paul?
Yes.
And you had a particular view on this one.
Well, I do have a view on this. I actually think that this part of monitoring what I believe is the cash flow, and also the performance of the council in relation to its budget, is an essential part of the operations of that council, and not a tick box exercise, which it could become if you just look to see who's going to sign it off. So although I believe there's a need to have somebody designated to sign it off, could be the chairperson, it could be a nominated member, could be the chair of the finance committee if you have one. The main thing here is to make sure that you have a healthy debate about the figures presented before a council, so they can decide how well are things going compared to the original budget, and to identify any problems as they occur, rather than leaving it until they're too late.
Thank you, Paul. Mark, I have to apologise in advance. I'm putting you on your spot now. There's some lots of questions coming in to you about budgets and about sort of earmark reserves. So I'm choosing this particular one about reserves to ask you. Does an earmark reserve in a budget need to be included in the buffer reserve total? Quite a specific question there. I'll give you time to have a think of it, because I want to come to Anthony, if I may, on a couple of others, if that's okay. Anthony, in terms of sort of the response that we've had about budgets, in terms of reserves and stuff, is there anything else that you wanted to add on top in relation to that?
No, I mean, again, good financial management would say you need to have a policy, if you like, on reserves. You know, how much you're going to hold, and try and keep to that. You know, we've seen examples, and I'm probably more familiar with much larger authorities that have large reserves, without perhaps taking account of that when setting precepts and things. So that needs to be taken into account. And there also needs to be, you know, a plan for how reserves might be used, rather than built up. And we have seen across the public sector in Wales, and particularly amongst local government, that despite the economic climate and austerity, reserves are increasing. And that might be fine, people again preparing for a rainy day, but we just need to make sure that there are plans about how those are spent. And again, thinking about future generations. You know, we could be storing up problems for the future if we just keep building up reserves.
Thank you. We've had several questions in about timeliness, helping them to get the accounts completed on time. I'm going to turn to Paul first in terms of what has One Voice Wales got to help and to support members in terms of training and so forth. Okay.
Well, we've got two programmes related primarily to finance for councillors. The first one is a basic finance course, which is aimed primarily at councillors. I wouldn't recommend that clerks attend that unless they're very new clerks. The second course we've got is one on advanced finance, and we look about through the preparation of the audit timescale from the very start, from the statement of accounts being prepared, the internal audit, the governance statement, and what happens in terms of the process leading up to the external audit. That course has been well attended lately. We've run quite a few in Wales, and a number of newer clerks have attended. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for experienced clerks. I think the SLCC have more in-depth courses which would be more relevant.
Okay, thanks. Mark, any from your neck of us?
Yes, can we just come back to the previous question of the reserves?
Yes, please.
Give me some time to think about it.
Yes, I know.
I'm not enough time to think about it now. But what I would say, general reserves and earmark reserves, yes, they're terms, but you've got one financial pot of money that you're responsible for. So I wouldn't get too caught up about where they need to sit. It's there in your accounts, and as long as you've got an earmark reserve or several earmark reserves for projects, that's fine. I think caution has to be made over general reserves per se, and for them not to rise too high, to the point that Anthony was making, that you've got to have specific intentions for how you use that money, and you've got a public responsibility as well to make sure that you're delivering an accurate precept which is not overburdening the public. And I think as long as you've got that balance right, then I wouldn't get too caught up about how everything is sort of made up in the same pot. Coming back to the question about training, I think it was, isn't it? Paul's right, the society has a number of training programs in place. It's got formal qualification route if you want to go that way through its Silca portfolio and Silca. But of course, they also then provide one-off training seminars on financial topics and subjects. And again, that's demand-led. So if there's a particular demand in an area, then what our advisors do would look at formulating programs to satisfy that demand.
So given what both Mark and Paul just said now in terms of training, obviously it will send you the links that they've just talked about, but if there is a particular demand for a particular course that Mark's talked about, please email us in and we'll share that information. We're having several emails about reserves. We've had lots of questions about reserves. Obviously this is a hot topic with you. Have we covered what you need to know? Are you feeling satisfied with that? If there's a supplementary question, we've got there's been several questions about examples of good practices in budgeting. Anthony, I'm going to turn to you first on this one, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I mean, as part of our work for the year that's just finished, We've been collating examples of good practice, and once we've collated those, we'll be sharing those with organisations so that people can see what good practice is out there.
Okay. And we'll make sure we'll blog about that as well and share both with Mark and with Paul, if that's all right, in due course, yeah?
Yeah.
Gents, if there's anything else you want to add in terms of good practice at this stage? You're all right on that one?
I think, well, there's one bit about, I just want to add in about reserves, some more advice for councils. If you are discussing things like the devolution of services or asset transfers from unitary authorities, think in advance about how you plan for those in terms of your precept setting. Don't leave it to the last minute and then wondering how you might fund a transfer. Think about whether you want to do it first of all, engage the community as appropriate, and then think about putting something in the budget, or indeed having an earmark reserve. But it's got to be something tangible and more likely to happen than not.
Reserve seems to be a really hot topic here. I've had a couple of supplementaries come in, gents, literally about sort of holding significant reserves just in case there's a mid-term election. The idea of a mid-term election seems to be quite on your minds tonight. Mark, can I come to you? The question, I'll take this particular question to try and capture it. It says, my council holds significant reserves just in case there's a mid-term election, which can be expensive. This can look like too much held in reserve. Be in reserve for this.
Well, sure, it's a piece of string.
I know, that's a good question, but there's quite a few questions along this line, so there's obviously something that's sort of close to their heart.
Well, if I can tell you my council approach, perhaps that might be a way of answering the question.
Yeah, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, is there, you know?
The election cycle is over a 5-year period. It is a good practice to perhaps put money aside for a casual vacancy. You can try and work out the cost of a particular ward or area based on historical costs. And if you like, you can come forward with a savings plan, very much like we did. So, for example, over the course of a 5-year period, we would set aside, say, between £2,000 and £3,000 a year to build up to pay for election costs when presented in the 5th year. Yeah. So that's another way of going at it. You can put it into reserve, certainly, and you can call it the earmark reserve for election costs. Simple as that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm aware that several of you have sent questions in under budgets. We need to draw the budget section to a close now. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, we will be capturing some of the questions and be speaking to Mark, Anthony and Paul after the end of the webinar and getting their views about some of those questions that have come through and sending you the link to the email, sorry, to the blog, if that's all right. So I want to turn to question 2 now about internal audit. And again, I'm seeing quite a lot of questions coming through already, gentlemen, so be prepared for this one. But in terms of the questions I wanted to pose to the panel, the question is a simple one. So why is internal audit important then? Paul, do you think I can start with you, if that's okay?
You can indeed.
Simple question, but I expect it's not a simple answer.
Well, I'm going to make a few points, and then Mark is going to make some of this as well. Well, we all have a duty towards ensuring the public money is properly managed, and what internal audit does is help us to manage that risk, which is vital. And we must maintain an adequate and effective system of internal audit because it's a requirement under the Accounts and Audit Wales regulations. So it's not about whether we want to do it, it's because we have to do it. But it's one of those things that you have to do, which is actually good for you as well. And some people ask me about who do you recommend as an internal auditor? And I always come back and I say, the person I recommend, whoever that might be, is competent, independent, and somebody that will not be influenced by the council in terms of, well, it might be influenced in terms of the work they do, but not influenced in terms of the outcomes they may find. So somebody who can, if you like, stand their own ground. So that's the kind of person you need to look for, but it's vital, it's important, and it's a must.
Oh, we've had quite a few people asking about sort of who we should appoint in terms of internal auditor. Yeah. That's a very clear statement of the criteria that they should be looking for, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Mark, can I come to you on this one?
Yes, thank you. Just to add to some of the points that Paul has been making there regarding the credentials of the independent auditor, it's important to look at skills, experience and knowledge. But I think an important thing that's often missed as well is the recommendations that come out from the auditing process. And I think that's just as vital as looking at the skills and competence. Because it's no use making recommendations if not particularly relevant to the needs of the council. So that's a key point to flag up. Coming back to the point generally about internal audit, it's there to help manage risks. So it's an important tool that councils should look to thoroughly employ to make sure that it's having a sound health check of all its financial arrangements and processes. As you know, the internal audit has the job of checking that council systems, council's a system of controls of its finances. This is known as internal control. A good auditing exercise will test all areas of internal control thoroughly, and this, if you like, then will provide the council with the assurance that it needs, so that it can then determine how effective things are. From that, they can deduce whether things are strong, weak, or need a little bit of work on, and then modify those processes accordingly. So very important to have a good system of internal audit in place.
Okay.
And one thing I would like to add, don't just stick with the same auditor. If you've, because we're all creatures of habit, and it's quite easy to stick in the mould of, you've always done it this way.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that perhaps for this sort of process, which is very important, is that you might want to check with colleagues, neighbouring councillors, about how they set about setting the internal audit arrangements, and indeed comparing them like with what you do to see whether you can take any points from that to add to what is already hopefully a thorough process.
Okay, great answer, thank you, Mark. Anthony, before I come to you, I'm noticing that we've got quite a lot of questions coming in about the themed thematic assurances requirements. So if you've got any more questions in relation to that, can you post them in now, and then I'll gather them all together if that's all right. So we've had a really good overview in terms of the importance of the role of internal audit here, Anthony. Anything else you want to add on to this?
Yeah, I would just add that you can have a highly competent internal auditor, etc., who gives you good reports which have some recommendations in, etc. If you then ignore those, you've lost all the value you would have gained from having an internal auditor. Okay. You need to maybe scrutinise and challenge the internal auditor to understand what the issues might be, and then act on the recommendations. There's no point at all in just treating it as a tick box exercise. We've got an internal auditor, tick, you get as good as reports, tick. One of the things we will be looking at for the next year is looking at the effectiveness of internal audit, and that to me is as much about how the council interacts with the internal auditor as the skills of the internal auditor themselves. Okay, just bear with me a second, Anthony. I've got a couple more questions coming in relation to the thematic. Just going to check that I've captured them all. Okay. Okay. Before we move on to the one on the theme one, I need to pose this question to the panel. We are a very small council, but need to bring a new accountant on board. Is there a list of accountants willing to help with community councils? Is it appropriate that we sort of be advised on the list? Is there a list that they can actually use?
I often get asked questions about, can I recommend an internal auditor? And the question is, I can't really, because as a membership body that supports councils in Wales, we have a conflict of interest in terms of recommending anyone, so we don't. But don't forget, you don't necessarily have to have an accountant. An accountant may well be required for the larger councils, but for the small councils, what I said in answer to the earlier question, look for somebody that's independent, competent, and in your assessment can actually do the job. You don't necessarily have to be an accountant.
Okay. Mark, anything to add on to that?
No, I come back to this document, Practitioner's Guide on Governance Accountability. And again, it gives guidance in there about looking at the type of skills that the internal auditor and the accountants you're required to look at from that perspective. And again, it's just taking your time to see what's out there, speaking to neighbouring councils to see what their arrangements are.
That's a really good guidance.
And I think looking at, certainly you can buddy up, smaller community councils can speak to one another about how the practices work for them and see where that leads, really. As Paul and Andy have made the point, it's horses for courses. You need to find the right fit for you to make sure that you're comfortable with that. And the most important thing is that you're quite clear about the information you're getting from them in return.
Okay. I really like the idea of talking to neighbouring councils. It's common sense, isn't it? And it gives you that sort of sense check, doesn't it?
Can I add just one thing to that? I think that if you want to get a good performance out of the internal auditor, make sure that the council provides the auditor with a schedule of duties and also a letter of engagement, so they know what is expected of them. If you don't do that, what you might get is good product, but not the product that you want.
Sage, very good advice there, very good advice, okay. Anthony, there are many questions that are coming in about the sort of thematic insurances. I'm going to choose this particular question because I think it seems to capture it all. So the question is, why does specific guidance on new thematic assurance requirements not emerge until annual returns have been issued to local councils and their internal auditors? Would you like to answer that one?
Yes, the question operates on a false premise. We don't wait for the annual returns to go out to advise people what the advise councils what the themes are. We use, for example, our annual report on financial management governance to highlight what the themes are. So if you look in the back of the current reports, literally the last page sets out what the themes will be for 17-18, and then an idea of what our current thinking is for the 3 subsequent years. So if you were to look at the issues we looked at for 15-16 that have just finished, those were first trailed back in 2012-13, our annual report. So the information is out there, and if people haven't seen the our sort of annual report on financial management governance, take a look at it. The first 2 or 3 pages cover, if you like, a summary of the table of contents. It's written in such a way that it has the key information, and if you want to know what the things are, go right to the back. Page 43, 42 and 43 cover what those themes are going to be. So it is there, and by and large, these aren't things that we're expecting the councils to do anew. They are things that councils should already be doing. Already have internal audit, already have budgets and monitoring, for example. So we're not creating any additional work for councils, unless, of course, they're not already doing these things, which will potentially cause some difficulty.
Okay. Just in case no one's clear what report that Anthony's talking about, Beth, can we send the English and Welsh link out for that report as well, if that's okay? Will you tweet that out for me, if that's okay? So just let them know.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect most people will have seen it,
sure, but
and that's probably the reason that we've got 300 people listening in this evening type of thing.
I know. Do you know what? The idea of that cake now is just perfect, isn't it? Okay.
Ina, can I just say something in support of what Anthony just said there about publicising the themes? I have to give a plug here to my colleague Derek Evans at Wales Audit Office. Yes. And fair play to Derek, he's constantly on the conference programme for both One Voice Wales and the Society of Local Council Clerks. Derek, as part of his presentation, always refers to the thematic themes that are coming up. So we're getting the message out there in various formats, whether it be the formal report, which people can read at the leisure, or by attending the conferences as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good.
Thanks for that.
Can I just add one thing? But I think for the smaller council clerk, and I'm a clerk to a small council, not very small, but quite small really. But for the very small council clerks, the ones that don't do many hours a week, sometimes I think I have to accept it's not easy to get to grips with all the things that come on your desk or on your email. Yeah. But the Society of Clerks, if you're a member, do a regular bulletin to staff. That picks out the key things really you need to look for. I'd certainly watch out for that. And One Voice Wales has recently started out their monthly information bulletin, and look for the key things in there as well. Try and read everything, of course, but if it's not
No. Okay, so there's a lot of questions coming on about good practice in terms of internal audit. Who's got good internal audit that we can learn from? Actually, let me pose that question out to you before I come to the panel. Do you have a good internal audit practice that you would want to share? Why not? Email it in to us at good.practice@audit.wales. Please feel free to do that, and we'll happily share it around, because as the panel has just been saying, it isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and maybe you could help and support some of your neighbouring councils as well.
And probably what I would add to that, Ina, is how do you know you've got a good internal audit service? So what are you doing to assess internal audit? Okay. Do you think you've got a good internal audit service simply because you get a report that says everything's okay? Does that tally with what you think yourselves? So how do you know you've got a good internal audit service?
So if I was a new clerk, what kind of things would you be expecting me to sort of be sort of asking the internal auditor to get that sense check there?
I guess I would want to be sure that, well, as Paul said, that there's a programme of work. You know what's going to be delivered. You know they're going to take a look at some of your basic systems, etc. You get reports on that. Those reports do not have to go into reams of detail, but there has to be sufficient detail in there to demonstrate what the auditor's done. While the basic tenets in audit is that you document sufficiently so that someone with no knowledge of the audit could re-perform it if they had to. So they know what you looked at. They know you looked at the cash, but they know you looked at the PAYE records if you've got them or whatever.
Okay. I'm just wondering if any of the clerks out there are listening in tonight, maybe you might have a simple system you might want to share with colleagues. Please feel free to email it in to us, because there's no point reinventing the wheel, and they can cherry pick elements of what's in your guidance that might help them as well. Mark, is there anything you want to add to what Paul was saying?
Just thinking about the components that might make up a good internal audit and what's included in reports for councils. Certainly we expect an auditor to look at sample payments over a defined period. I think as well, giving a good governance check, we're looking at the minutes, so you're looking at spending decisions to make sure then that you're not acting out of ideas by making lawful decisions, so you've got a power to tie up the expenditure. It's just that general governance, I think, overall. So you can then split it between looking at sample on payroll to see what being paid as salaries and spot payments that way, checking your PAYE records. There's so many different areas that you can test. And even looking at wider generic strategic things such as your financial regulations, other things like that, which more focus is perhaps on the nitty-gritties of the accounts.
Yeah.
But I think the other documentation that you've got, which adds to the governance, is equally important to then assess the robustness of those. It's only when you get a problem do you realise how strong or weak you are with those processes.
Yeah, okay. That's a very good statement to end that one. I like that one. Thank you. Okay. Paul, before we move on, is there any sort of comments that you want to add to what has been said so far?
No, I think the points about internal audit have been well covered. I've got nothing to add to that.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks very much. So I'm going to move on, if I may, to the third and the final question, if that's all right. We've tried to put ourselves in your shoes, if you like, and sort of think about sort of the one key advice you might want to take away from tonight, because there's been lots and lots of information being shared with you. So before I turn to the panel, I'd like to ask you, is there one thing that's worrying you that you'd want to get some advice on? Please email it through to us now onto good.practice@audit.wales, and I'll ask the panel to share their views on that. But in the meantime, are you happy, Paul, for me to come to you? What's the sort of, we've put ourselves in your shoes, if you like, thinking about this in terms of this response, haven't we? So what would your one key piece of advice be?
Yeah, can you just enlarge on that question a little bit for me?
Okay, it's about thinking about sort of, you're in the shoes of either the clerk or the council members, right?
Yeah.
And sort of, we've covered budgeting tonight, we've covered internal audit. As a starting point, if there was only one thing they took away from what we've talked about tonight, what's the one thing you'd get the delegates to actually focus on?
Well, now you know me a little bit, I can only say one thing. I'll just say two. But the two things I'd want to say are, first of all, make sure as clerks, and especially councillors, that you do understand about financial governance and accountability. There's training out there that's there for the taking. It's very good. And I think if you've got that, you've got the basic essentials to understand what your role is and to perform it effectively. And the second one is that if you really want to exercise good governance and stewardship, organise yourself appropriately in line with the training that you can receive, and make sure, as others have said, that the internal audit is effective and you do get an annual report and you act on the recommendations that you receive.
Thank you very much, thanks, Paul. Mark, can I come to you on this?
Yes, I'd start off with a general point. First of all, don't panic if you feel that things need to change, and don't be afraid to seek help and support. Remember, the clerk's lot can be a lonely lot at times, and your chief cook and bottle washer doing a myriad of different tasks, all to an exacting standard, and you can't be perfect at everything all the time. So if things need to change, c'est la vie. The purpose of putting on tonight's webinar and the training course that we do is to bring about continuous improvement, and we're here to help clerks do a better job and to make sure that they're meeting their responsibilities in terms of advising the council. I know you only said one thing, Ina, forgive me.
You're allowed.
Thank you. What I would say as well is, looking at your accounting process, is I think for those councils that see it as a one-off exercise, then you fall into the trap. It's not a one-off exercise to satisfy the external audit arrangements. It's a constant in order for councillors to carry out the scrutiny role properly. So that's the advice that I would tender on that.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Before I come to Anthony, there's a couple of questions we'd like to ask you. This is the first time that we've held a webinar for this community. So I'd like to ask you, does the time of the day work out all right for you? Would another time be appropriate? Thinking about what's going to be happening in the future, is there a particular topic you may want us to focus on? Would you like to share that? And also, working through this method as a webinar, how has this been for you? Those are the three questions we kind of like to get some views on, if that's all right. There's a couple of questions coming in, I can just see on sort of Tuesday and stuff, folks, so I'll come to those in a minute, but before that, Anthony, in terms of the one key advice, what would that be?
Just to reinforce what's already been said, really, and I do not underestimate the task that clerks and members have in community councils. But it's to understand your responsibilities and to make sure that you have the support available to discharge those, whether that's internal audit, budget monitoring, or whatever. You need to understand what your responsibilities are, and if you look at the future themes that we've got coming up in the report, those are all linked in effect to statutory responsibilities that councils have. So understand what your responsibilities are, and then make sure that you have either the resources or the capacity or capability or the wherewithal to be able to discharge those responsibilities. Because when things go wrong, they become reputationally damaging, they become expensive, and all of that can be avoided by just giving sufficient time and thought at the outset to getting things right.
Okay. Thank you, thanks for that. I can see TUPE seems to be a topic that's sort of close to your hearts. Quite a few questions coming through. Paul, I'm going to give you the heads up on, I'm just going to choose, I think I'll choose this question to represent the TUPE question, if that TUPE transfer. So it's quite a long question. Right. Should local councils be seeking advice on matters such as TUPE transfers when considering the implications of new service provision responsibilities? And could the panel provide a toolkit which would assist local councils to demonstrate they have undertaken their duty of due diligence, I beg your pardon.
Okay, fine.
Do you want me to repeat that?
No,
You're right,
I'm clear on that one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think in the main, if you're considering the transfer of an asset or devolution of a service, you need to be very careful and ask the right questions at the beginning about, do these assets or services transfer with the staff currently linked to those transferring with them? Because if they do, in certain circumstances, you're going to have to respect all of the terms and conditions and provide not necessarily the same pension scheme, but one that's generally on a par with it when they come over into your employment. So that is a big issue, not necessarily an issue to put you off, but it's an issue for you to be aware of. Now, we've been running a devolution of services training course now for the last 3 years, and one of the things we cover in that, not in any great depth, is the due diligence process you need to follow in relation to any transfer. And that's not just TUPE, that's one of them, but there's other factors you need to take into account as well. And the other thing is we've, with the Society of Clerks, we've been jointly pushing the Welsh Government to fund a devolution of services toolkit now for, I think, 3 years, when I was involved in preparing an outline of a toolkit. It looks now, as part of the local government reforming white paper, there is a commitment now to have that prepared. So that will be there for your use, and also give you a good guide to dealing with due diligence issues.
Thank you for that, Paul. Thanks very much.
You know, I know it seems like a backward point,
Yeah.
but you know, delegates understand what 2P is,
Okay.
2P transfers,
Okay.
you know, what the term means, and so you know, it's transfer undertakings protection of employment.
Yeah.
I think you know, as Paul's alluded to, that there might well be an issue there where you know, 2P might apply to a tagging on a service that you're taking over from a principal authority. You can also gauge the opinion of the principal authority as well in this. Paul's quite right to mention that the toolkit has been developed by Welsh Government, and the National Training Advisory Group, the NTAG group, which both Paul and I sit on, will hopefully oversee and have an input into that process to make sure that the toolkit is comprehensive in every element, so that councillors can be rest assured then that they've got the right sort of support there to make sure that they're asking all the right questions, being fully prepared, and they're going into something with their eyes fully open, wide open.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks very much. We've got lots of questions coming through on code of conduct. It's members' code of conduct. What I'm going to say about that topic is that I think this is one topic that we're going to commit to blogging about, because there are so wide questions on this one. I don't think we could do it justice. So Beth, I'm making a note that all the questions in relationship to members of code of conduct, we will blog about, if that's all right, and we'll get contributions from both Mark and Paul. We've got a couple of things coming through on Twitter. There's an observation that we've just been shared to do about how do we, as Anthony says, how do we know if it's good? I'm assuming you're referring to internal audit here. I'm not sure. So that whoever sent that point in, can I seek clarity on what you're actually saying? How do we know if it's good? I don't like to assume, because being an auditor, we like to have the facts in front of us, and you could understand that. But could you tweet back and let us know on that one? So, a couple more questions coming through here. Again, we've got, oh, there's a late one coming in about budgeting, folks. Are you happy to take
Yes.
it?
Depends what it says, you know.
Oh, actually, there's three coming in about hold on a second. Just opening it up now, technology being what it is. Okay, where are we? More about we've covered about software and using the use of sharing. How do we feel about the sharing of software with other authorities? I'm assuming. Oh, that's in relation to payroll. Sorry, I haven't read it properly. Sorry. Right.
Well, on payroll, I can tell you that many councils do share a payroll service.
Okay.
But they don't run it on anything, but what they often do is they buy into, say, the local authority's payroll service. And I know a few councils that buy into, say, relatively small accountancy practices that provide a payroll service. The cost per head per payroll process per month is quite low, and it takes away the risk of dealing with all things like tax and that and so on.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Right, I'm just waiting for there's one other on budgeting. Sorry, I'm going to have to seek clarity again, because it seems to be, I think we've actually had that question. Yes, it's in relation to software. Okay, that's fine. Doug, I'll wait for if there's that response comes through on Twitter, if that's okay. So folks, this has been your first experience of a webinar. I hope it's been an enjoyable one. You're part of the panel. So if there's any observations you want to make post this webinar, please email us in or tweet us in. I'm going to ask Anthony now to talk about sort of what are the next steps in terms of sort of the topics that we're going to be covering in future, and also sort of in terms of the community, how we can share this information. Anthony, can I hand over to you in terms of topics?
Yeah, of course. Just looking forward to 17, 18. The topics that we're looking at are the effectiveness of internal audit and the use of reserves. So a bit of a follow-up there on internal audit, and reserves has clearly been quite a hot topic today. So that's very timely. Or maybe we're getting all the questions because people already know it's a thing for next time and they want to get it all sorted out. That's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Better get it out in the open, isn't it?
And then for some of the future years, looking at compliance with standing orders. delegation to committees, so how committees are being used within the councils, arrangements for making payments, the employment of staff, the future, the well-being of future generations, and also looking at the use of Section 137 in terms of the Local Government Act 1972. So there's a variety of things there. As I say, it's worth councils just getting to grips to understand what their responsibilities are under those areas, and then making sure they are discharging them.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Right, I think it's time now for me to say thank you very much to our panel members tonight for taking part. Paul, diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Mark, diolch yn fawr. Anthony, thank you very much indeed. Dyfrig, Beth, thank you very much for working so hard behind the scenes. Really, really appreciate it. So what's going to happen now is this recording will go up on YouTube in about 15 minutes. You can use this as a resource and go back over it anytime you want to. On YouTube, it'll be under the Wales Audit Office account. So if you go onto your YouTube and under the search button put Wales Audit Office, this will be up there in with about 15 to 20 minutes. Again, many of you, it's your first experience. Please let us know how it worked for you, what worked well, what didn't work well, because we'd like to make sure that we're providing help and support as you need it. Diolch yn fawr am eich cefnogaeth heno, dyn ni gobeithio bod chi wedi mwynhau e. Dwi'n Nina Lloyd, dwi'n rhan o'r tîm ymarfer da. Fe hoffwn i gweud nos da, diolch i chi. My name's Nina Lloyd, we're signing off now. So on behalf of the Good Practice team of Dyfrig and Bethan, I'd like to say thank you very much indeed for your contributions. It's been really appreciated. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr a nos da i chi.